to wage modern, combined arms operations in the first stages of World War II. Most historians use the North African and Sicily campaigns as the departure point to explain how U.S. Army improvement was a linear process throughout the Second World War. The traditional historical narrative of the U.S. Army treats the Mediterranean theater of operations as a deadly training ground for green U.S. forces. Somehow, so the narrative goes, the lessons learned on the beaches of Oran, the hills of the Kasserine Pass area, and the collapse of the Tunis bridgehead all contributed to later success in Western Europe. Most authors assume that combat experience is essential for success, and that's just what the units in North Africa needed. However, the U.S. Army did not enter an effectiveness trajectory that neatly began in the Mediterranean. Battalion leaders immediately provided effective combat leadership without any prior combat experience, also known as being blooded. These first units did not have the time to absorb institutional lessons learned, as did the majority of the U.S. Army, mobilizing for the cross-channel invasion. Regular Army officers proved to be highly trained and adaptable, and courageous in their first combat experiences in North Africa and Sicily. Their leadership proved to be essential at the battalion level. Battalions formed the key building blocks of combat commands during World War II. At that level, battalion leaders were center stage at the tactical fight. While the tactical level of war extended all the way to Corps headquarters throughout World War II, the regimental, division, and Corps headquarters mostly allocated combat resources and coordinated movement of units. Battalion leaders did some of that, but they also closed with and destroyed the enemy on a consistent basis. The U.S. Army lost only 3 generals to enemy ground combat action in all of World War II. In less than 1 week of combat in Normandy, the 82nd Airborne Division suffered a 70% casualty rate among its battalion commanders. This sampling gives a slight indication of the risk differential at the command levels. American units throughout the North African and Sicilian campaigns suffered casualties typical of U.S. Army divisions in the European theater throughout World War II. The high-intensity warfare shredded divisions at frightful rates from beginning to end. Combat inflicted roughly the same casualty rates on divisions even after they had endured multiple campaigns. The actions of untested battalion leaders in the MTO did not incur higher casualty numbers as some have suggested. If the U.S. Army proved to be too green in North Africa, and an organization that had to take its licks before it got better, then casualty rates should have been much higher. Against some of the most experienced units in the German Army, the U.S. Army battalions that fought from the North African coasts to Messina, Sicily, did not endure higher casualty rates than any other American units in Western Europe, 1944 to 1945. Up until 31 December 1943, about 5% of the officer corps in U.S. Army divisions were regular Army. Of that 5%, the vast majority of these officers served on regimental, combat command, and division staffs. The Army ground forces had an enormous shortage of seasoned officers. To make up the shortage, the U.S. Army had to rely on its officer candidate schools to fill about 2/3 of the officer positions. Most of these were lieutenant and captain positions. The company-grade officers who filled these billets would later lead platoons, companies, batteries, and maintenance sections. So, many divisions became top-heavy, with plenty of experience at the top and a significant leadership gap in the actual troop formations. Wisely, the U.S. Army placed regular officers into key leadership billets to compensate for this lack of experience. George C. Marshall, the Chief of Staff of the U.S. Army, and Leslie J. McNair, the Commander of Army Ground Forces, conducted thorough reviews to select the senior officers for divisions, but they did not pick the regimental and battalion cadre officers. Marshall and McNair recognized that each division needed quality battalion leadership, but they could not hope to scrub every file to ensure a fair distribution. They enforced a cadre system that required older divisions to transfer some of their officers to newly formed units. This system did not result in a truly equal talent distribution. Units that formed first, such as the ones that fought in the MTO, had a higher percentage of quality as well as trained regular Army officers and reserve officers. Specifically, the 1st, 3rd, and 9th Infantry Divisions and the 1st and 2nd Armored Divisions escaped the heavier cadre levies due to their earlier deployment overseas and rigorous training program. Prior to their overseas movements, all of these divisions participated in the 1941 maneuver exercises, and the infantry division